Would you have followed the Dred Scott case?
As a lower level judge,
Yeah.
I mean,
What is rent control?
as I understand rent control, it's some cities may have laws that limit the ability of landlords to raise rent, but it's not something I'm that familiar with.
Okay. Well, why isn't that a taking that merits compensation from government?
I don't know whether that's been litigated or how that's been resolved. I have never dealt with rent control.
Well, I want to understand what you think about it, how you think. Why isn't it a taking? I mean, your government is taking money from the private owner of an apartment. Why isn't that a taking? Just like if they took his property to build a highway.
So I'm not well-versed enough in takings to give you a definitive answer, but I'll give you what I know about takings. And
No, tell me what you think. Tell
So,
me how you would analyze that case.
I would be looking at the precedents that say to what extent can government regulation be permitted.
Suppose there are no precedents. I know we'll stipulate you would look at precedents.
But the
I want to know how you would analyze that case.
Well, the question is, what can the government do as far as regulation where there's still value in the property, but maybe not the maximum, and does that constitute a taking? That's what I'd have to study. I don't know the answer
Tell me
about
what
that.
you think about it. How would you analyze it?
Well, from what I know about,
What are the competing interests?
well, the competing interests are the government's interest in housing, I would think, on one side, the property owner's interest in making the maximum amount of money on the other.
Well, why couldn't the government, it has a legitimate interest to help poor people. Why couldn't the government accomplish that by just allocating some tax money to housing subsidies? And then you don't have to take somebody's private property.
That would be a policy decision, another way to try to get at that end. You're asking me whether it's a taking.
Yeah,
And I think that I am not sure that a limit on how much you can make constitute a taking, but I don't know that for sure. I would need to think about that and study that.
well, aside from if you were back in private practice, how would you analyze that? How would you reach a decision?
Again,
Please don't tell me you go look at precedent, because
Well-
you're not going to find much.
I know that there are cases about regulation that limits the value of property. And I believe that those cases say, unless the property is basically brought down to no value or very little value, it's not a taking. That's my memory.
No,
and that
that's
would be
not
relevant.
accurate. That's
But
not
I could be wrong about that.
You can have a highway come through and take part of your property, which
Right.
diminishes the value, but you've still got to compensate the landowner, and you've got to compensate the landowner for consequential damages as well. That's clearly a taking. Why is rent control any different, Counselor?
Senator,
Achieve government purpose in a less discriminatory way? Why isn't this open and shut?
well, Senator, without doing more work on it, I mean, I tried to tell you what I would think about it, but I'm also telling you I don't know necessarily how it would come out, and I would need to read and think about it more. But I would think about the government interest, understanding that there is a loss to the owner of the property, and figure out how those interact.
Okay, what's the new rule about how flexible an employer has to be if an employee asks for an accommodation because of a religious belief?
There has to be, the employer has to suffer a substantial hardship, which is a change in the law. The law was more, gave employers more flexibility in that area, and there was, I think the cases DeJoy from last term made that more difficult for employers, raised the burden on them.
Okay, fair enough. You will faithfully follow precedent, is that right?
Yes, and I will do my very best to do that, yes.
Would you have followed the Dred Scott case?
As a lower level judge,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a yes or no.
I think that, Senator, I mean, there's a
have
fidelity of lower court judges, and hopefully our Supreme Court would make the right decision
You
there.
have followed the Dred Scott case.
As a lower court judge, I think you have no choice, but you can write that the Supreme Court should do something about that, and I would have.
Would you have followed Plessy v. Ferguson?
It's the same answer. You have to. Agostini versus Felton said lower court judges must follow Supreme Court
Why
precedent.
wouldn't you quit first?
Well, I guess I hadn't thought of that option, Senator, but I would certainly make my voice heard, but I would have to follow the
Dred
precedent.
Scott was an immoral decision, do you?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, why wouldn't you quit?
Perhaps I would. I hadn't thought about it like that, Senator. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that.
Okay.
But I would make my voice heard. But I do want to say that in a vertical court of judicial system, it is critical that middle level judges do their best to follow precedent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.